The whole hall went quiet when Orrin Dast took the courting band off his own wrist and laid it in Lady Lizette Dane's open palm. Tamsin Hale heard the small ring of metal on skin from 20 feet away. A week earlier, Orrin had kissed her cheek outside the record's wing and promised he would stand beside her when Master Essel announced the new senior keeper of Temper Records. She had spent 6 years in the Hall of Balance sorting incident ledgers, restraint orders, border testimony, blood-scent notes, and witness reports from every pack in the Moon Vale. She knew which shift-sick wolves clawed walls before they bit. She knew which herbs soothed heat rage, and which only made wolves drowsy enough to wake meaner. She knew which magistrates lied by how carefully they avoided the quarantine corridor. None of that mattered now. Given the dignity required of the post, Magistrate Howrick Dane said from the dais, his robes silver at the hem, his voice thick with public importance, "The office of senior keeper cannot remain in hands better suited to kennel duty. Lady Lizette will assume the chair." A few people laughed. Not many. Just enough. Enough for heat to crawl up Tamsin's neck while every wolf nose in the room caught the change in her scent. At her boots, Mallow pressed close against her legs. The snow leopard's coat gleamed pale cream in the brazier light, her rosettes soft as smoke over snow. She took the end of her own huge fluffy tail in her mouth and stared at the dais with flat, offended eyes. Someone near the back muttered, "Look, even the cat knows." Another voice, female and delighted, answered, "Maybe they can keep records in the stables together." Orrin turned then, finally looking at Tamsin. He was handsome in the easy, polished way of men who had never once had to fight to be listened to. His new winter blue coat fit too well. His smile was careful, almost apologetic, which made it worse. "This is best," he said, loud enough for everyone. "You know it is." "Best for whom?" she nearly asked. For him, clearly. Orrin was a junior legal aide with ambitions bigger than his backbone. Tying himself to Howrick Dane's niece would lift him faster than remaining bound to a records woman who spent her days around sedatives, ink, and frightened wolves. Tamsin kept her spine straight. You might have found the courage to say it before the whole hall was watching. His jaw tightened. "Don't make a scene." Howrick cleared his throat as if she were the offense in the room, not the ambush. "Mistress Hale, you will surrender the senior keeper's seals and remain in your present assignment under supervision. Your practical talents are more useful in the lower records kennels." Lower records kennels. Not the hearing chamber. Not the public archive. Not the senior desk she had already been doing the work for, unpaid, while Master Essel's hands shook too badly to sort the ledgers himself. Mallow released her tail and gave a low, rumbling sound. Howrick's eyes flicked down with thin dislike. "And that animal will remain restrained during official business." Mallow sat down very deliberately on the end of Tamsin's gray office sash. A few people snorted. The humiliation hit full and hard then. Orrin. Lizette. Howrick. The open room. The certainty in their faces that she would absorb it in silence, lower her eyes, and carry their insult like another stack of records. Her fingers ached around the leather case she had brought for the ceremony. Inside were her catalog revisions, her seasonal incident maps, and the report she had prepared for her first day as senior keeper. She looked at Orrin, at Lizette, who did not even have the grace to appear embarrassed, at Howrick, whose office had been rerouting supplies and rewriting incident outcomes for months. Tamsin had noticed irregularities. She had made careful notes. She had told herself she would raise them once she had the authority to do it properly. Authority had just been handed elsewhere. So be it. Slowly, she unclasped the slim copper band from her own wrist. Orrin had given it to her in spring, beneath the alder trees by the south gate. He had said nothing grand, just a promise to build something steady. She crossed the floor in dead silence, climbed the 2 steps to the dais, and set the band down on top of Howrick Dane's polished announcement tablet. Not in Lizette's hand, on the magistrate's words. Orrin stared. Tamsin said very clearly, "Find someone who mistakes cowardice for steadiness." A sharp hiss went through the room. Orrin flushed dark. Lizette went stiff. Howrick drew himself up, ready to rebuke her. The side doors slammed open before he could. 2 wardens dragged in a lean young man with iron at his wrists and blood on one temple. He could not have been more than 19. His lip was split. His pupils were too wide. Behind him came a distraught older woman and 3 more guards. Farrell breached from the north pens, 1 guard barked. Bit a handler during inspection. The hall changed in an instant. Heads turned. Bodies tensed. Wolves under human skin sharpened with alert. The young man was forced to his knees in the center ring. Tamsin saw three things at once. The boy's hands were shaking, but not with blood rage. With exhaustion. His breathing was ragged, but the scent of his sweat lacked the copper-sour edge of full red loss. And Mallow, who hated strangers crowding too close, was not growling at him. She was staring at the small brass ritual burner a warden had set near the ring. Tail and mouth again. Eyes narrow. Howard recovered first. "Bring the temper brand," the older woman cried out. "No. Please. He's from Frost's Scar. He only panicked. The smoke in the pens made him sick." "Silence," Howard snapped. "The classification will proceed." A warden reached for the iron brand from the brazier. Everything in Tamsin went cold. The smoke in the pens. She knew that smoke. Moon resin and sleep bark, usually. Unless something had been mixed wrong. Unless it was the same bitter undertone she had caught twice this month in the quarantine ledgers and once in the south stairwell outside Howard's private storage. The boy tried to pull back. "I didn't lose myself," he said hoarsely. "I didn't. He shoved me and I couldn't breathe." No one listened. At the far edge of the hall, behind a half-circle of guards, a tall man in a dark coat lifted his head. Tamsin had noticed him earlier only as a presence. Too still. Too large for the line of attendants around him. He wore no family colors she recognized, only black leather and heavy silver restraint cuffs over both wrists. His hair was dark, almost blue in the firelight. A pale scar cut through one eyebrow. When he looked toward the center ring, the room seemed to feel it. Frost's Scar, she realized. Then she saw his eyes. Not human gray. Wolf silver. Rydian Voss. Even Tamsin knew that name. The ruined alpha of Frost's Scar. The Black Wolf of the North Pass. The man branded unstable after the night of split snow, when half his pack had torn into each other during a winter rite, and the court had blamed his bloodline for the frenzy. He said nothing, but every guard near him shifted as if a knife had been drawn. In the center ring, the brand hissed as it rose from the burner. Tamsin moved before good sense could chain her. "Stop!" Her voice cracked across the hall sharper than Howard's gavel. The warden paused in surprise. Everyone turned. Howard stared down at her as if she had barked. "Mistress Hale," he said with dangerous softness, "remove yourself." "No." Tamsin stepped into the ring. "He doesn't present as Red Loss." The room erupted in whispers. Howard's face hardened. "You will not interrupt a public classification on the strength of kennel impressions." "They aren't impressions," she shot back. "His pupils are reactive, not fixed. There's no blood foam, no jaw lock, no scent spike at the neck. His tremor is in the hands, not the shoulders. And if he were gone to rage, that animal would know." She pointed to Mallow. Every head swiveled. Mallow had risen and walked, silent as falling snow, into the edge of the ring. She ignored the boy completely. She ignored the crowd. She went straight to the brass burner and sat beside it, tail still in her mouth, glaring at the smoke as if it had insulted her ancestors. A laugh slipped from somewhere. Nervous. Quickly smothered. Howard's nostrils flared. "Your cat is not legal testimony. She is a witness beast under border code," Tamsin said. "Or she was, before the court got too grand to remember why mountain packs used them." That landed. Even a few older wardens looked uncertain. Howard snapped. "Frostscar law is suspended." Rydian Voss finally spoke. "Frostscar law was never revoked," he said. His voice was low, deep enough to be felt before it was understood. The sound of it slid over the room and left everyone a little stiffer afterward. Howard did not look at him. "You are present as an observer, not a participant." Rydian's mouth did not move, but danger did. Tamsin stepped closer to the burner. She smelled it clearly now beneath the moon resin. Bitter. Green. Wrong. "Let me inspect the smoke." A guard reached for her arm. Mallow's head whipped up, and she showed teeth. Not a dramatic snarl. Something much quieter, and therefore more effective. The guard withdrew. Howard flushed. "This is outrageous." "Then disprove me," Tamsin said. "Under hearing law, a recorded officer may lodge a safety objection before branding. You taught that rule yourself, magistrate." He had, years ago when training junior clerks. He had not expected one of them to use it against him. Silence stretched. Howard could override her if he wished. But not cleanly. Not in public. Not with Rydian Voss watching, and the boy's mother crying, and half the hall suddenly remembering there had once been rules for caution before punishment. At last he said, "A delay of one night. No more." The boy sagged with relief, so sharp it broke Tamsin's heart. Howard pointed at her. "And you, Mistress Hale, will answer for this interference." "Gladly," she said, though her hands were shaking. For one brief second, she looked across the room. Rydian Voss was already looking at her. He did not smile. A man like him probably did not waste smiles in public. But something in his expression had changed. Not softened. Not warmed. Focused. It felt worse, somehow, than anger. By the time the hearing broke, Tamsin's promotion was gone. Her former suitor had stopped trying to catch her eye, and 3 separate people had informed her she had ruined her life. Master Essel, trembling and miserable, had pressed her elbow and whispered, "You were right to stop it." Then he had looked over his shoulder toward Howrick and added, "But be careful now. Careful now after the damage." A little late. She took her box of work from the senior keeper's anteroom herself. Lisette had already moved her gloves into the desk Tamsin had expected to inherit. Oren stood nearby with a stack of fresh appointment documents, all righteous discomfort and no shame. "Tamsin," he said as she passed, "you've made this harder than it had to be." She stopped. Mallow stopped with her, turning in a pale circle and then sitting heavily on Oren's boot. He flinched. "Get her off." "No," Tamsin said. He looked down in disbelief at the snow leopard, who had taken the end of her tail in her mouth again and settled more firmly, pinning him in place. Around them, 2 junior clerks abruptly became very busy with nothing. Oren lowered his voice. "You're emotional. That's understandable. But Dane will make an example of you if you keep pushing." The sad thing was that he truly believed he was being practical. Tamsin looked at the man she had once imagined marrying, and felt something inside her go cleanly dead. "I spent 2 winters covering your mistakes in filing," she said. 3 months correcting your testimony dates because you can't count backward from a full moon, and 1 entire season listening to you speak about honor as if the word belonged in your mouth. Be grateful all I did was return a bracelet." His face went white, then red. The junior clerks looked up very quickly. Tamsin clicked her tongue once. Mallow rose at once, leaving a bright line of pale fur on Oren's polished boot, and followed Tamsin out. The lower records kennels sat beneath the main hall, cut into cool stone. Some cages held ledgers sealed against scent and damp. Others, on the far side, served for temporary holding when a shifter needed observation after a bad turn. Tamsin preferred that side. Animals and frightened people made more sense than politics. Paran, the boy from the hearing, had been placed in the 3rd holding room with padded walls, a blanket, and watered broth. No brand. No chain at his throat. He looked up when Tamsin entered. "Are they sending me to the hollow pens tomorrow?" "Not if I can stop it." His eyes stung bright. "Why did you help me?" "Because you didn't smell like a man who'd lost himself." She crouched outside the bars. "Tell me about the smoke." He rubbed his wrists. "They burned it during intake. Said it would calm us. It made my skin crawl. There was a green taste in the back of my mouth. After that everything got loud. Green taste." Mallow paced to the vent in the wall and sniffed. Then she sneezed hard enough to startle herself, glared at the vent, and sat on it. Tamsin's pulse jumped. Someone had run that same smoke through the holding level. She rose. "Don't touch the burner if they bring one again. Don't breathe deep if you can help it. Wet cloth over your mouth if possible." Paran swallowed. "Will anyone listen to you?" "That depends how much trouble I'm willing to cause." "Judging from today," said a deep voice from the corridor. "Quite a lot." Tamsin spun. Rydian Voss stood in the archway, as if he had always belonged there, and stone had simply grown around him by mistake. He had changed since the hearing. The silver cuffs remained, but his black coat was open now, showing a broad chest wrapped in dark wool and leather straps. He looked as if winter itself had learned how to stand upright. His face was hard in the way of cliffs and old wounds. Not handsome in the polished court sense. More dangerous than that. The sort of face that made sense only when paired with teeth. 2 wardens had followed him down, then apparently thought better of coming closer. They waited at the far bend. Tamsin straightened slowly. "You're not supposed to be down here. Neither are magistrates who tamper with sedation smoke, but the day is full of surprises." Mallow trotted to him, stopped a careful yard away, and looked up. Rydian looked down. They considered one another like rival monarchs forced into diplomacy. Then Mallow leaned forward, took the hanging strap of one of his gloves into her mouth, and tugged once. Tamsin closed her eyes. Of all the animals in the world, she had bonded the only one who treated feared alphas as unattended baggage. Ridian glanced at Tamsin. Is that insult or approval? With her, sometimes both. A breath moved at the edge of his mouth. Not quite laughter. Close enough to alter the whole air. He crouched, slow and deliberate, until he was nearer Mallow's level. The movement pulled his coat open farther. Old silver scars marked both forearms, thin and bright against tanned skin, like the memory of restraints worn too long. Mallow released the glove, sniffed his wrist, and huffed directly at one scar. Then she turned her back on him and padded to Tamsin's side. Ridian rose. She doesn't like what was done to me. The words were plain. The meaning under them wasn't. Tamsin studied him despite herself. There was something tightly reined in about him. Not the smooth self-control of courtiers. This looked earned. Expensive. The kind that had to be rebuilt every morning. What do you want? She asked. The same thing you do. Proof. He looked past her to Paran in the holding room. The boy had gone very still. He's Frost Scar, Ridian said. 3rd this month. 7th this season, if you count those never brought to hearing. Tamsin felt the facts shift and lock. 7. She knew of 5. 2 had been removed before reaching public record. You've been tracking it. I've been burying the ones no one listened to. The line landed hard. Tamsin took a breath. The smoke is wrong. I know. Then why haven't you raised challenge? At that, something cold entered his face. I did. 3 years ago. The night of split snow. Tamsin had read every official account. Frostscar winter right. Sudden mass frenzy. Dead kin. Ridian Voss blamed for unstable alpha blood and placed under court restraint. Border rights seized for public safety. Official accounts were written by winners. The court said your pack turned savage. The court says many useful things. Paran pressed close to the bars. Alpha Dash Ridian's head turned sharply. Not here. The boy swallowed and looked down. Tamsin noticed it. The respect, the reflex. Whatever Ridian had lost in court, his pack had not forgotten him. One of the wardens at the corridor bend called, 5 minutes, Voss. Ridian ignored him. They'll come for the records tonight, he said to Tamsin. The real ledgers. Not the public copies. Dane won't let your objection stand if he can erase the pattern. Her mind leapt to the lower archive vault. How do you know? His eyes, silver-flecked in the dim, rested on her face. Because if you could smell the resin in one hearing, you're more dangerous to them than I am. Heat moved strangely through her at that. Not because it was praise. Because he meant it. Tamsin folded her arms. And you're telling me this out of generosity? No. He came one step closer. The corridor seemed to tighten around his size. I'm telling you because you stepped in front of a brand for a frightened boy, while a hall full of wolves watched. That kind of stupidity deserves useful information. She stared at him. Then, against all reason, she laughed. It burst out of her, brief and startled. Mallow looked up in approval. Ridian's gaze dropped to her mouth for one dangerous second before returning to her eyes. There, he said quietly. You smell less like heartbreak. The honesty of it robbed her speech for a moment. Down the corridor, the wardens shifted uneasily. Tamsin said, If you plan to help, do it without looming. I am not looming. You are made of looming. That almost laugh touched his mouth again. Search the vent stores first. Dane routes what he doesn't want logged through secondary ducts. Tamsin filed it away. How do I know you're not using me for your own revenge? His expression went flat. You don't. Fair. Then his voice changed, lower still. But if I wanted this court burned, Mistress Hale, it would already be ash. The wardens clearly heard that. One cursed under his breath. Ridian stepped back at last. Do not go into the archive alone. And then he was gone, swallowing the corridor with him. Tamsin stood still until the silence settled. Paran let out a tiny breath. He came down here for you. No. He came down here for evidence. Paran gave her the pitying look of the very young, when adults lie badly. Mallow sat on Tamsin's boot and began washing one enormous paw. The archive was on fire before midnight. Not all of it. Just the lower corridor outside the sealed storage room, where incident ledgers from the last 4 years were kept. Tamsin smelled smoke while climbing the west stair with a bundle of fresh linens for the observation rooms. She dropped everything and ran. Mallow outran her, pale body flashing through torchlight. By the time Tamsin reached the lower hall, 2 shelves in the outer records room were already burning. Someone had smashed an oil lamp against the stone and left the flame to climb through loose paper. No accidental fire. She grabbed the wall bucket and threw water across the nearest shelf. Steam and soot hit her face. Mallow launched onto the next stack and hooked down a burning ledger with one great paw. Off, Tamsin coughed. Mallow off. The leopard seized the ledger in her teeth and dragged it clear anyway. Of course she did. Tamsin wrapped her forearm in her apron, reached through heat, and pulled open the iron inner door. Smoke rolled out thicker there. The sealed room beyond should not have been burning. Someone was inside. She saw him only as movement first. A shape near the back shelves. A hand. A flash of glass. Stop! The figure hurled a vial toward her. It shattered against the doorframe. Green powder burst through the air in a bitter cloud. Tamsin inhaled before she could turn away. The world punched sideways. Her lungs locked. Her skin prickled. Every sound grew claws. Somewhere Mallow snarled, huge and furious. Tamsin stumbled, hit the floor hard, and tasted metal. A boot rushed toward her through smoke. Then something darker hit it. A roar cracked the room open. Not human. The attacker screamed. Through tearing coughs and stinging eyes, Tamsin saw gray-black fur, massive shoulders, teeth bright in the firelight. The wolf slammed the man into the shelf, so hard ledgers rained down. A second later the beast wheeled toward Tamsin, huge and terrible, and all power held on a thread. Silver eyes. Rydian. Even in wolf form he looked built for winter war. Dark coat mottled with ash gray along the ruff and spine, chest broad enough to blot the aisle, one ear torn at the tip. Smoke curled around him, and found no softness. He moved to Tamsin, nosed her shoulder once, hard, then swung back toward the attacker, who was trying to crawl. Mallow came out of the smoke like a pale knife and planted both front paws on the man's back. He stopped crawling. Good choice. Rydian shifted before her eyes. The change happened fast and horribly beautiful, bone and shadow and muscle folding in on themselves. One heartbeat there was a wolf, the next a man dropping to one knee in the smoke, naked from the waist up and breathing hard through bared teeth. Tamsin had seen shifts before. Never one like that. Never one that left the room feeling too small. Rydian grabbed her jaw gently but without asking. Breathe slowly. Not deep. The contact shocked more than the fire. His hand was hot. Rough. Steady. She tried to obey. Coughed instead. Look at me, he said. She did. His pupils had gone long and dark. The wolf still pressed near the surface, visible in the sharpened planes of his face, in the way he seemed to listen with his whole body. It was green ash, she rasped. I know. He tore a strip from his own shirt, soaked it from the wall bucket, and tied it over her mouth and nose with blunt efficiency. His fingers brushed the nape of her neck. Heat flashed down her spine. Behind him, the attacker groaned. Mallow sat down more firmly on the man's ribs and took her own tail in her mouth as if settling for a long watch. Rydian glanced back. Good cat. Mallow narrowed her eyes at him as if praise had not been requested. Tamsin pushed to her knees. The ledgers. He moved instantly, hauling down 2 half-burned bundles from the inner shelf while she staggered to the rear cabinet. The one she needed was locked. Move, Rydian said. She moved. He ripped the cabinet door off its hinges. Tamsin stared at the metal in his hand. That was excessive. It's open. Fair again. Inside were intake logs, restraint orders, and seasonal resin inventories. She seized the bundles marked North Transit and Frostscar detentions. The smoke thickened. Voices shouted from the corridor. Rydian picked up the unconscious attacker one-handed, as if he weighed nothing. Tamsin clutched the records. Mallow, affronted by the sudden rush, snatched something from the floor in her teeth and trotted after them. They burst into the corridor just as 2 guards arrived with buckets. The lead guard stopped dead at the sight of Rydian half-dressed, soot-blackened, carrying an arsonist by the collar. What happened? Your security failed, Rydian said. It took the guard a second to remember breathing. Tamsin coughed behind the wet cloth. Seal the room. The smoke's tainted. Don't burn anything else until I inspect it. The second guard looked from her to Rydian to the limp attacker and back again, plainly overwhelmed by the order of urgency. Then he noticed Mallow. The snow leopard was carrying a leather case in her mouth. Not a rag. Not a scrap. A case. Tamsin blinked. Mallow. What have you got? Mallow set it down at her feet and sat on it. Rydian's eyes flicked to the case. The vial pouch. Tamsin crouched and opened it with shaking fingers. Inside were 3 stoppered tubes of green powder, a list of heating ratios, and a folded note marked with the seal of Howard Dane's private office. For once, no one in the corridor laughed at the cat. An hour later, Tamsin sat in a disused infirmary room with wet hair, singed sleeves, and a headache like hammer blows behind her eyes. Mallow slept under the window, paws twitching, one corner of the stolen leather case trapped possessively beneath her flank. Rydian stood across from Tamsin with his back half-turned, while she cleaned the chloraced cut along his shoulder blade. The attacker had carried a knife. In the confusion of smoke and fire, the blade had scored Rydian before the wolf put him through a shelf. "You can sit," Tamsin said. "I prefer to stand. You prefer to intimidate furniture." His shoulder shifted. The nearest thing to amusement. He was broad enough that wrapping the bandage took concentration. Her fingers brushed hot skin and corded muscle. Several older scars crossed his back. Not battle alone. Some were too narrow. Too parallel. Restraint marks. Tamsin's mouth tightened. Rydian noticed without turning. "You pity badly too." "It's not pity." "What is it then?" "Anger." That made him look at her. Truly look. The room went quieter. Tamsin tied off the bandage and stepped back. "Those aren't the marks of a right gone wrong. Those are from being handled like a dangerous thing for a long time." His gaze stayed on her. "I was a dangerous thing for a long time." "Were?" One corner of his mouth moved. "Optimistic tonight, aren't you?" She should have been frightened of him more than she was. Every sensible part of her knew that. He had a reputation that reached schoolrooms. He carried violence the way some men carried titles. But nothing about him since the hearing had matched the court stories. Dangerous, yes. Cruel, no. Across the room, Mallow opened one eye, confirmed no one was dying, and closed it again. Tamsin set the salve aside. "The case she dragged out has enough to force an inquiry. Not enough to topple Dane. No. He'll say an underclerk stole incomplete materials and forced a narrative onto them. An underclerk with a history of insubordination and animal attachment issues," she muttered. "Exactly." She crossed her arms. "You sound almost admiring." Rydian leaned one shoulder against the stone wall. The posture should have looked relaxed. On him, it looked like a hunting pause. "I've had limited entertainment the last 3 years." The line warmed her against her will. She opened the transit ledgers on the narrow table between them. "These North resin inventories are wrong. Look here. Frost scar shipments used to arrive sealed through the high pass. Then after the night of split snow the route changed to Dane's private storehouse. Every batch after that shows added calming compound with no listed source." Rydian came closer. Much too close for thinking. She felt him before she fully registered his position. A heat at her shoulder. The faint clean scent of cold air and wolf and ash soap. He bent over the ledger, one hand braced beside the page. Huge hand. Scarred knuckles. Tamsin's pulse behaved very stupidly. "Here," she said far too quickly, tapping the margin. Same notation on every hearing where the subject was classified within an hour of smoke exposure. Rydian looked where she pointed. "The clerk mark is altered." "Yes." She glanced up. "You can read ledgers?" He looked down at her. "I was an alpha, not a turnip." The wordless sound she made startled both of them. Rydian's eyes dropped to her mouth again. Silence swelled. Not comfortable silence. Not uncomfortable either. Something warmer. Closer to dangerous. His fingers curled against the table once. Hard enough that the wood gave a tiny creak. Then he straightened and stepped back before contact could happen. Tamsin realized, a beat later, that he had done it on purpose. Control. There it was again. Earned. Expensive. Mallow sat up, looked from one of them to the other, and deliberately climbed onto Rydian's fallen coat. The moment broke. Tamsin laughed, this time with real breath behind it. "Apparently she's chosen your side of the room. She chose the warmest thing in it." Tamsin looked at him. Rydian did not blink. She looked away first. By dawn they had a plan neither of them liked. The written proof suggested corruption in the resin supply. To make it undeniable, they needed origin marks from the old frost scar route and witness testimony from one of the shifters first exposed before public classification. Those records and people had both been buried. One in the mountains, the other in the hollow pens. "We should go to the pens first," Tamsin said. Rydian shook his head. Two watched. Dane will tighten every guard after tonight. Frostscar passes faster. Faster for you. I am not a mountain wolf. No. You're a records woman with suicidal habits and a cat who steals evidence. Mallow, chewing gently on the corner of his coat, ignored this slander. Tamsin rolled up the ledgers. If I'm helping restore your pack's route, I want the truth. All of it. What happened on the night of split snow? The question sat between them. Rydian's face closed at once, so thoroughly that she almost regretted asking. Almost. At length he said, we ran the winter tempering right before first storm. Same resin we'd used for years. Same bellkeepers. Same circle. Halfway through, my uncle started bleeding from the nose. Then 3 of the young males lost recognition. They turned on their own kin. I tried to break the circle. Someone said my wolf sparked it. By morning there were 9 dead. His voice remained even. That made it worse. The court arrived at noon. Dane was with them. Tamsin felt cold. You think he knew then? I think he knew before. He looked down at the ledgers she had saved from the fire. I think Frostscar was chosen because the North Pass brings moon resin, iron bark, and winter salt into the vale. Once my pack was called unstable, Dane placed court guards on the route. He acquired a crisis and a cure on the same day. Tamsin imagined Howrick Dane standing over the wreckage of a pack and calling it order. Her hands curled. We go to Frostscar, she said. Rydian's gaze sharpened. It isn't a gentle trip. Neither was last night. He looked like he might argue anyway. Then Mallow hopped off the coat, crossed to Tamsin, and leaned all her long pale body against Tamsin's shins with a firm, possessive shove. Rydian watched the movement. Something unreadable passed across his face. Fine, he said. We leave before sunrise. The north road climbed out of Highfall, through pine woods silvered by old snow. Tamsin rode a sure-footed mare borrowed from the infirmary stores, bundled in wool with 2 satchels of ledgers strapped behind her. Rydian rode ahead on a dark mountain horse that matched his temper, and turned often enough to verify she still existed. He didn't call it checking on her. He simply looked back every few minutes with that hard silver stare. Mallow refused the cart entirely. She ranged along the roadside or padded ahead on silent feet, a pale ghost among drifts. Sometimes she carried her tail in her mouth while walking, which made the mare nervous enough to side-eye her every time. By noon the forest thinned into rock and wind. Frostscar land rose in blue-white ridges beyond, wild and old. Tamsin had never been this far north. She understood at once why wolves claimed it, and why softer court officials preferred to talk about it from heated rooms. They stopped once by a frozen stream. Tamsin dismounted with stiff legs. Rydian was already there, filling canteens. You could have told me the road was mostly cliff. I assumed the cliff would introduce itself. She glared at his back. Your people are insufferable. My people used to say the same about court clerks. Mallow stalked out of the brush, carrying a snowshoe hare almost as big as her head. She dropped it at Tamsin's boots, then sat and took her tail in her mouth. Rydian glanced over. She's feeding you. She's showing off. Same thing, usually. Tamsin crouched to rub behind Mallow's ears. I appreciate the gesture, but I prefer my meals less, recently offended. Mallow blinked. Rydian watched them with a look Tamsin couldn't place. Not softness exactly. Something more private than that. On the ridge path higher up, they encountered the first Frostscar sentries. 3 wolves stepped from behind broken stone in human form, cloaks thrown over leathers, weapons loose at their hips. Their scents hit the air before their words did. Warning, suspicion, recognition. The oldest, a dark-haired woman with a scar across her chin, froze when she saw Rydian. Alpha. Rydian's whole body changed. He didn't swell with pride or throw his weight around. He simply became more himself. Straighter. Colder. Certain in a way that explained at least half his reputation. Not here, he said. The woman's jaw worked once. As you say. Then she looked at Tamsin, and went still for a different reason. Who is that? Tamsin Hale. No, the woman said flatly. I mean, why is there a court woman on our ridge with a snow leopard? As if summoned by insult, Mallow sauntered straight past the sentries, into the center of their defensive standing circle, and sat down on the exact patch of snow that marked their lead position. Then she curled around her own tail and stared into the middle distance. The 3 wolves looked personally attacked. Tamsin bit the inside of her cheek. Rydian's voice went dry. Her name is Mallow. She has no respect for rank. The younger of the sentries whispered, horrified. She sat in the alpha place. Mallow yawned. For the first time since Tamsin had met them, two Frostscar wolves made helpless sounds that were very close to laughter. The dark-haired woman exhaled through her nose. Fine. Bring them in before Aunt Nara thinks we found ghosts. Frostscar's hold was built into the mountain itself, half stone and half old timber, ringed by prayer bells gone dull with weather. It should have felt grim. Instead it felt lived in. Work tables, drying herbs, thick rugs, children darting between adults with none of the brittle fear Tamsin had expected in a disgraced pack. Conversation stopped when she entered. Not because of her. Because Rydian had come home. He did not bask in it. If anything, he grew tenser under the looks. An old woman with one milky, I pushed through the crowd with a cane and hit his shin with it. Idiot boy, she said. You vanish for 8 days and come back bleeding again. Rydian bowed his head without protest. Good to see you too, Nara. Then the old woman's I found Tamsin, traveled to Mallow, and widened. Well, she said, either the mountain has started granting jokes, or you've finally done something interesting. By evening Tamsin had learned 3 important truths. First, Frostscar did not believe Rydian had caused the split snow frenzy. Not one of them. Second, they also did not entirely trust the court woman in their hall, no matter who she had embarrassed in public. Third, Mallow had solved that faster than Tamsin could have. At supper, while everyone arranged themselves by age and rank around the great hearth, Mallow leaped onto the long central bench reserved for senior wolves, turned twice, and placed all 4 paws directly on Rydian's ceremonial cloak. The hall held its breath. Rydian looked at the snow leopard. The snow leopard looked back. Then, in full sight of everyone, Rydian sat beside her and tore a strip of roasted venison from his own plate. Mallow accepted it with solemn dignity. The hall erupted. Not loudly. Frostscar were not demonstrative people. But shoulders loosened. Mouths twitched. One young man covered his face. Nara slapped the table and called, there. Pack accepted. The cat has spoken. Tamsin felt the tension shift away from her by half a degree. Rydian did not look at her, which was almost worse than if he had. Later, when most of the hall slept, he brought her to the old right chamber. It lay below the mountain hold where the rock opened into a round cavern lit by blue fire bowls. Iron hooks hung empty along the walls. Ancient claw marks scarred the stone ring at the center. This is where it happened, Rydian said. Tamsin crossed to the circle and crouched. Faint resin stains darkened the rock seams. Age had not erased them entirely. Mallow entered behind her and at once began sniffing along the eastern edge, tail waving. Tamsin took out her scraping knife and small wax papers. Don't tell me what you remember yet. Rydian's brows drew together. Why not? Because memory tries to please authority. Stone doesn't. He went very still. Then quietly, you're better at this than they deserve. Tamsin ignored the heat that brought. She scraped residue from the seam. Sniffed. Bitter trace. Faded, but there. She moved to the next section. Mallow stopped abruptly before a narrow crack in the floor, pawed once, then sat on it. Rydian came closer. What is it? Tamsin knelt by the crack and found, hidden beneath a loose edge of iron inlay, a bead of dark resin fused into stone. She pried it free. Even now, 3 years on, it carried the same wrong green bite under the moon's scent. Her blood turned to ice. This was deliberate, she whispered. Rydian's face emptied of everything but fury. He did not roar. He did not strike the wall. The force of his anger went inward, deeper and more frightening for it. Tamsin rose slowly. If this residue matches the powder from the fire and the smoke from the pens, we can prove the rite was tampered with. It will prove someone poisoned us. Which is enough to break Dane's hold on the official story. Rydian looked at the little wrapped sample in her gloved hand as if it were a grave marker. He took my pack from me, he said. Tamsin answered carefully. He took your position, not your pack. His gaze snapped to hers. Too direct, perhaps. Too true. For one long second the air between them thickened. Then Mallow, bored by human intensity, rolled onto her back in the center of the sacred ring and batted at the tip of her own tail. Rydian shut his eyes. Tamsin made the mistake of laughing. When he opened his eyes again, something in them had gentled by 1 dangerous inch. She has terrible timing, he said. She has perfect timing. He took 1 step toward her, close enough that she could feel the winter heat of him in the cave's chill. close enough that every instinct in her body woke and looked up. "You don't fear me properly," he murmured. Tamsin's breath snagged. "I fear you just enough." His eyes flashed wolf-bright. "That answer should worry you." "It does." Neither of them moved. His hand lifted. Stopped. Hovered just beside her jaw without touching, fingers flexing once as if restraint itself hurt. Then he dropped it. The denial of contact felt more intimate than touch would have. When they left the right chamber, Tamsin could still feel the absence of his hand against her skin. The witness they needed came from the hollow pens in pieces. Her name was Sarai. Frost Scar Healer. 32. Classified unstable 14 months earlier after objecting to new sedation ratios in public. Tamsin found that in a side ledger on the second night at Frost Scar, buried beneath supply complaints. "We have to bring her out," Tamsin said. Ridian's expression said he had already thought of it and hated the answer. The hollow pens stood outside Highfall on the old quarry road, where inconvenient people could be kept out of sight and still called protected. Getting in would require either a signed writ or criminal intent. They settled on criminal intent. By the time they returned south, Howrick Dane had already moved against them. Notices waited at the city gate accusing Tamsin Hale of archive theft, official interference, and unlawful possession of restricted compounds. Ridian Voss was ordered back under direct court supervision pending review. "That seems unfair," Tamsin said, reading the broadside. Ridian looked at the wall. "I'm shocked." Mallow sat on her hindquarters beneath the notice and bit her tail with great concentration, as if restraining comments. They entered Highfall after dark through the old drain arch below the dye quarter. Tamsin had not planned, when her week began, to sneak into her own city with a disgraced alpha and a snow leopard the size of a pony. Yet here she was. The hollow pens smelled wrong before they came into view. Not rot. Not blood. More subtle. Resin, old fear, wet stone, and that bitter green edge. Mallow's shoulders went high at once. Ridian motioned for silence and led them along the quarry wall until they reached the rear ventilation trench. 2 guards at the main gate. 1 at the side lantern post. More inside, likely. Tamsin whispered, "Can you distract them?" He looked at her. "Tamsin." She folded her arms. That was a serious question. The corner of his mouth twitched. "Yes." The next 10 seconds were the most instructive of her life. Ridian stepped out of shadow, walked openly toward the side guard, and said in the calmest voice imaginable, "I need you to turn around and reconsider every choice that put you on this wall tonight." The guard turned. Saw him. Dropped his spear. By the time the man had decided whether to run or faint, Ridian had him sleeping on the gravel. Tamsin stared. From behind her, Mallow made a small chirrup as if this confirmed excellent breeding. Inside, the pens were less cages than stone rooms with barred fronts. Too many were occupied. Some wolves paced. Some slept. Some crouched with hollow eyes. A few merely looked sick. Not feral. Not monsters. Drugged. Frightened. Worn down. Tamsin's fury rose clean and lethal. They found Sarai in the back row. Thin. Graying at the temples. Her wrists scarred from iron. She looked up when Ridian approached, and for one terrible instant failed to recognize him. Then she did. She came to the bars so fast her knees hit stone. "By the frozen gods," she whispered. "Ridian." He gripped the bars. "Healer." Tamsin turned away half a step, giving them that privacy. Sarai's gaze found her then, and Mallow beside her, and sharpened despite the haze in her face. "You brought a witness beast," she murmured. Tamsin moved closer. "You remember the old border code. I remember when this valley had won." Sarai wet her lips. "Dane told the court I lost temper control. I said the new smoke ratios weren't calming anyone. I said the young ones came out worse. 2 days later I woke in here. Did you see him alter the resin?" Tamsin asked. Sarai closed her eyes. "I saw his aide change casks before the split snow tribunal. Green ash and moon resin. Said it was a tonic from the South Marsh. I refused to sign the intake. After that," she touched her temple, "they kept dosing me. Will you say that publicly? If you get me into public." Ridian's jaw tightened. "We'll get you out tonight." Sarai looked at him with something like pain. "And put every pen on alert?" "No. Bring me to the assembly instead. They still will us there sometimes as examples." Tamsin felt sick. Examples. Mallow had gone to the brazier vent outside Sarai's room, and now refused to leave it. She pawed at the iron grate until it rattled. Tamsin crouched. Behind the grate were stacked cloth packets. She tore one open. Green ash. Stored in the very vents. No wonder the prisoners worsened. Rydian swore softly. From somewhere down the row, a low snarl rose as another captive caught the scent of strangers. Time collapsed. Take the packets, Tamsin whispered. All of them we can carry. If these are found missing now, Dane will know exactly what we know. He knows already, Rydian said. A bell rang at the front gate. Too late. Lights flared in the outer corridor. Voices. Boots. Tamsin grabbed 3 packets and shoved them into her satchel. Rydian ripped the entire grate off and swept the rest into his arms. Mallow, wild with offense, seized 1 packet in her teeth. Then the first guard rounded the corner. What happened next spread through Highfall by noon and grew larger in every retelling. The short version was this. A terrified warden saw Rydian Voss standing in the hollow pens with contraband ash under one arm and a snow leopard under the other person's laws, shouted for restraint teams, and made the fatal mistake of striking his baton against the bars of an already drugged wolf. Half the corridor erupted. Not into slaughter. Into panic. Tamsin moved on instinct. No eye contact, she snapped at the nearest guard. Lower your voice. Open the side vents. No one obeyed. So she did it herself, yanking the lever by the first duct while Mallow launched at a second guard's sleeve and dragged him 3 steps sideways. Rydian vaulted the corridor rail, shoved one man out of striking range, and planted himself between the pens and the advancing restraint team. It should have looked like the beginning of a massacre. Instead, he simply stood there. Tall. Barely contained. Silver-eyed. Drop the hooks, he said. 3 men obeyed before they realized they had. One did not. He lunged. Rydian took the hook out of his hand and folded the iron rod into an angle against the wall. Tamsin did not know human beings could make that sound with metal. The pens got louder. Wolves inside paced, clawed, shook. The green ash packets had burst in the scramble. Bitter smoke spread. Tamsin ran straight into it, wet scarf over her nose, opening vent after vent. Water, she shouted. On the braziers, not the prisoners. Mallow streaked ahead of her, pale tail flying, and body blocked a handler from closing the wrong valve. Not that one, Tamsin snapped. That feeds the inner hall. The man stared. She grabbed his hand and slammed the correct lever down. Cold air rushed through the corridor. One by one the pacing wolves slowed. Not instantly. Not magically. But enough. At the end of the row, Sarai gripped her bars and shouted hoarsely. Tell them to breathe through cloth. It settles in the throat first. Tamsin took it up at once. Cloth over mouth. What it if you can? Rydian moved pen to pen, not speaking much, only enough. A name here. A command there. His presence alone did something no court medicine had managed. Wolves who had been one heartbeat from breaking held themselves together, because he was there, and because he clearly believed they could. Tamsin saw it and understood, all at once, why the court had feared him enough to destroy him. He was not dangerous because he lost control. He was dangerous because others would follow him even when he refused to ask. By the time City Watch reinforcements arrived, the corridor was a tableau of collapsed authority. Green ash on the floor. Hooks dropped. Vents open. Packets of contraband stacked by Tamsin's boots. Sarai standing behind her bars, fully visible to everyone. Rydian beside Tamsin, breathing hard, Wolf close to the surface and yet still, somehow, perfectly in command. Howard Dane himself arrived within minutes, cloak flung over formal robes, Oren and Lizette behind him. Oren stopped when he saw Tamsin in soot-streaked skirts and Rydian at her shoulder. The expression on his face was almost worth the last week by itself. Howard recovered first. Arrest them. No, Tamsin said. It came out colder than his voice this time. She lifted one of the green packets before the entire gathered watch. These were hidden in the pen vents. Sarai of Froscar will testify she objected to this compound before her own classification. I am invoking a public trial of temper at the midwinter assembly. That silenced even Howard for half a beat. It was an old rite, older than his office, seldom used because it required a public reckoning before all packed delegates, and because a false invocation could ruin the caller forever. Lizette whispered, she can't. Tamsin met Howard's eyes. I just did. The midwinter assembly was held 3 days later in the Moon Circle, an open-air amphitheater cut into white stone above Highfall. Every pack of the Vale sent delegates. On ordinary years the day ended with trade agreements, border petitions, and too much speechifying. This year, people arrived before dawn for blood. Tamsin stood beneath the outer arch in her plain gray record coat, because her formal insignia had been revoked. She wore no courting band, no title, only the witness satchel at her hip and mallow at her side, pale as winter light. Below, the moon circle filled in rings. Howard Dane presided from the central dais in full office silver, though the strain around his mouth showed. Orrin stood at the clerk's rail. Lizette sat behind the record table she had stolen from Tamsin, and now gripped like a raft in a flood. Sarai had been brought under guard, exactly as promised, seated where the whole assembly could see her. Ridian waited in the upper circle with Frostscar's delegates. He wore black again, but no restraint cuffs today. That alone had set the crowd murmuring. He saw Tamsin under the arch and held her gaze for a long, still moment. Ready? The look asked. No, she thought back, because some truths are too large to carry without shaking. But she walked down anyway. Howard's opening remarks were everything Tamsin expected. Disorder, theft, emotional misconduct, the regrettable influence of unstable border traditions. He spoke for nearly 10 minutes without once mentioning the dead from split snow or the innocents held in the hollow pens. Then he made his mistake. And now, Howard said, Mistress Hale may present whatever story she has stitched together from grief, resentment, and animal theatrics. A few people laughed. Mallow, hearing herself insulted by tone if not vocabulary, marched straight past Tamsin, crossed the central speaking ring, and sat down in Howard Dane's own place at the foot of the brazier. She took her tail in her mouth and stared up at him. The laughter stopped because half the wolves in the circle had just witnessed a snow leopard claim a magistrate's ground. Howard's face went nearly purple. Remove that creature. No, Tamsin said, and stepped into the ring herself. Her voice carried clean in the winter air. I've spent 6 years recording who this court calls unstable. I know what real red loss looks like. I know what grief smells like after a failed shift. I know what pack violence sounds like through stone. What I do not know is why so many recent classifications show the same symptoms after exposure to court-issued calming smoke. She opened the first ledger on the standing table. I filed objections twice this season regarding inconsistent resin logs. Those objections vanished. I inspected the public burner used in Peran Frostscar's attempted branding and found a bitter green contaminant beneath the moon resin. That same compound was recovered from the archive fire set to destroy these ledgers and from hidden packets stored in the ventilation shafts of the hollow pens. She laid down the wax papers, the residue beads, the seized packets. No flourish. Just facts. The crowd leaned in. Orrin rose. Unauthorized materials cannot be entered without chain certification. Tamsin turned her head. You'd know about broken chains, Orrin. A ripple went through the benches. His face burned. Good. Howard slammed his staff. Personal attacks will cease. Tamsin didn't even look at him. Then stop making yourself relevant to them. There. That gasp. Worth everything. She continued before he could recover. I submit the recovered right residue from Frostscar's old circle, where the split snow deaths occurred. It contains the same contaminant trace as the current pen smoke and archive vials. Healer Sarai of Frostscar will testify that she objected to the altered resin supply before her own confinement. Sarai stood, shaky but proud. Her voice wavered only once. She told them everything. The changed casks, the green ash, the threats, her refusal to sign intake forms, her sudden classification and removal. By the time she finished, the assembly no longer sounded curious. It sounded angry. Howard rose. A healer broken by confinement and a clerk embittered by failed advancement do not overturn a court finding. At that, Ridian Voss descended from the upper ring. He did not rush. He did not posture. He simply walked into the central circle, like winter taking possession of low ground. The assembly parted for him on instinct. Howard stiffened. You have not been called. No, Ridian said. But you used my debt as paperwork. That earns a reply. He stopped beside Tamsin, not in front of her. That mattered. Everyone saw that it mattered. Ridian faced the assembly. 3 years ago my pack lost 9 wolves in a right this court certified. I challenged the resin, the timing, the symptoms. Dane called it alpha instability. Since then, Every border pack that questioned his supply changes has seen classifications rise while his office tightened control over the North Pass. If I were as unstable as claimed, today would have ended differently. Silence. Then low and dangerous, he added. Instead, I'm still standing here. And so is the woman you underestimated, because she works where truth leaves stains. Tamsin felt the line like a hand at her back. Howard struck the dais again. Sentiment. Mallow stood. Not because of the voices. Because the central brazier had changed scent. Tamsin saw it at once. The leopard's head lifted. Ears forward. Nose working. Body hard. Wait, Tamsin snapped. Too late. A servant at the rear of the dais tipped a hidden lever. Smoke surged from the brazier in a sudden thick green-white plume. The nearest delegates recoiled. Several wolves flinched hard. Somewhere in the benches, someone growled. Howard shouted, You see? Even now Voss agitates the circle. Liar. Tamsin moved before the panic could spread. Cover your mouths, she shouted. Do not inhale deep. Douse the base, not the coals. Rydian wheeled toward the brazier. His whole body changed in one brutal instant. Shoulders wider. Eyes fully silver. Wolf at the edge. The assembly saw it and cried out. This was what Howard had wanted. A public slip. One violent moment, and every piece of evidence would drown beneath the old story. Tamsin reached him first. Not by force. By focus. Rydian. He heard her. Barely. The wolf was there, driven wild by the same poison smoke that had ruined Frost's scar once before. She stepped into his line of sight. Look at me. His breath tore in sharp pulls. His hands had become claws at his sides. Around them, guards hesitated. Delegates surged. Howard smelled victory. Tamsin held Rydian's gaze and trusted what she had learned in caves, archives, holding rooms, and stolen quiet. Not the man the court described. The man who stopped his own hand short, rather than touch without choosing. The man who carried hurt like iron, and still used his body as a wall for the weak. The man whose wolf was more honest than his mouth. Breathe on 3, she said. 1. His nostrils flared. 2. His jaw trembled. Mallow sprang onto the dais. Not at Rydian. At the brazier. She hit the iron lip with both front paws, sent the top grate crashing sideways, and exposed the false chamber hidden beneath the official resin bowl. Inside lay a nest of green ash packets tied with Howard Dane's private seal cord. The assembly exploded. Tamsin never took her eyes off Rydian. 3. He exhaled. Long shaking. Controlled. Then again. Then he looked at the brazier, saw the packets, and the wolf receded just enough for his mouth to become human. The relief that tore through her was so fierce it almost folded her knees. Around them, delegates were shouting now. Some at Howard. Some for guards. Some in horrified recognition. Lisette had gone white as paper. Oren backed away from the record rail. Howard tried to speak over the noise. Fabrication. They planted dash. No, said Master Essel from the lower benches, rising on trembling legs. Every head turned. The old senior keeper had not attended a public hearing in months. Yet there he stood with a ledger clutched in both hands. I kept copies, he said, voice shaking but clear enough. Not because I was brave. Because I was afraid. Mistress Hale flagged the altered inventories twice. I saw them removed. I signed the private duplication myself. He held up the book. Oren made a sound like a trap thing. Essel looked straight at him. And you altered the margin marks afterward. That did it. Oren sagged where he stood, all polish drained away. Howard spun toward him. Say nothing. Which, of course, meant it was too late. Oren looked at the whole assembly, at Lisette, at Howrick, at Tamsin, and chose the kind of cowardice he had always preferred. The kind that saves itself by betraying yesterday's allies. It was Dane's order, he burst out. The ash came through his sealed stores. I only changed the entries. Lisette knew the shipment numbers. Everyone in the office knew we were smoothing panic. Lisette gasped, Oren dash, don't, he snapped, panic stripping away refinement. Don't leave it all on me. The crowd roared. Howard lunged for the record table. Rydian moved first. He did not attack the magistrate. He simply stepped between Howard and Tamsin, one hand catching the older man's wrist before it reached the evidence. The grip looked almost gentle. Howard dropped to one knee with a strangled cry. The whole assembly saw Rydian could have broken him, and did not. That mattered too. Tamsin turned to the ring of delegates above them, forcing her voice through the chaos. This court used fear of feral loss to strip packs of rights, drug vulnerable wolves, bury healers, and falsify public record. The hollow pens hold more people who need review, not chains. Frostscar's disgrace was manufactured. So were others. I request immediate suspension of all current classifications tied to Dane's office, release of the resin stores for independent testing, and restoration hearing for every pack condemned under these compounds. No one laughed now. No one called her kennel girl. The first delegate to stand was not Frostscar. It was an old woman from River Reed Pack who leaned on a cane and shouted, seconded. Then another voice. Then three. Then half the circle. Howard Dane's authority did not collapse in private. It shattered above the city, where everyone could watch it happen. By sunset he had been stripped of seal, staff, and office pending formal judgment. Lizette's appointment was voided. Oren was placed under guard so quickly he barely had time to look betrayed by the consequences of his own choices. The hollow pens were ordered open to review. Sarai walked out under winter sky without chains. And Tamsin Hale, who had entered the assembly in a plain gray coat with no title at all, left it carrying the temporary authority seal of the newly formed office of Temper and Witness. The public reversal tasted better than she had imagined. Not sweet. Clean. The city changed fast after that, because truth with paperwork behind it is harder to kill than gossip. The first week was chaos. Tamsin barely slept. Every holding room had to be reassessed. Resin stores inventoried. Old classifications checked against symptom patterns. Frostscar's route records reopened. Master Essel installed in a warm chair where he could supervise and complain at equal volume. She took over the office Howrick had once used and opened every shutter in it. The room smelled better immediately. Mallow claimed the window bench. Of course she did. Rydian came and went through those days like a storm choosing useful routes. He escorted released wolves home, calmed border packs ready to riot, and stared down half the city watch simply by existing in corridors. He did not crowd Tamsin while she worked. He also did not go very far. Sometimes she looked up from a stack of testimony and found him in the doorway, arms folded, listening to her argue a procedural point into surrender. The look on his face then was deeply unfair to concentrated women trying to do their jobs. Once, late at night, she caught him watching while Mallow lay across her feet beneath the desk. "What?" she asked without looking up. "You command rooms now." "I always did." No one wrote it down. When she finally lifted her head, he was looking at her the way wolves looked at fire in hard winter, as if heat had become visible. "You were right," he said. "About what?" "My pack." She set down the pen. Rydian stepped inside and closed the door behind him. "Not locked. Just closed." "They were mine before title," he said. "I knew that. I think I forgot it mattered." Tamsin stood. The room shrank the way it always did when he came close. Outside, the city bells sounded second moonrise. Inside, the silence carried all the words neither of them had had time to use. "Mallow likes you," Tamsin said, because beginning anywhere else felt dangerous. Rydian looked to the window bench. Mallow, upside down in a patch of lamplight, had all 4 feet in the air and appeared wholly uninterested in politics or romance. "I've noticed," he said. "She doesn't like most men." "I've also noticed." Tamsin took a breath. "You keep watching me like you're deciding whether to bite or bow." His eyes flashed. "Both are possible." Heat climbed her throat. There it was, the honest wolf in his mouth at last. He moved one step nearer. "Tell me to leave and I will." That was the thing with him. For all his danger, the choice kept landing in her hands. Tamsin's pulse beat hard and slow. "I don't want you to leave." Rydian's whole body went still. Then even stiller. It should not have been possible, but somehow it was. He lifted one hand, and this time did not stop short. His fingers brushed the line of her jaw, calloused and careful, as if he had spent weeks memorizing the distance and was finally allowing himself the truth of it. Every nerve she possessed woke at once. He lowered his head. Not fast. Not claiming. Giving her time enough to step away. She did not. The first kiss was not gentle in the soft sense. It was restrained, and that was hotter. All that force turned careful. All that wolf held behind choice. His mouth was warm and firm, and devastatingly sure. Tamsin reached for his coat, because standing suddenly seemed less reliable. He made a rough sound low in his throat that went straight through her. Then Mallow thumped off the window bench, landed between them, and shoved her big head directly against Rydian's hip. They broke apart. Tamsin laughed against Rydian's chest, unable not to. Rydian dropped his forehead briefly to hers, and exhaled something that might have been a curse in old Frost's scar. Mallow looked up, very pleased with her intervention, then took her tail in her mouth and sat on Rydian's boot. "Your timing remains terrible," he told the leopard. Mallow blinked. Tamsin smiled. "She's checking whether you're still civilized." I was not aware the test involved interruption. "It does with her." He looked at Tamsin then, really looked, and whatever he saw seemed to settle something deep. "When the restoration hearing ends," he said, "I want to ask you properly." Her heart kicked. "Ask me what?" Rydian's thumb brushed once beneath her ear. "Not in a room full of ledgers." For the first time in weeks, Tamsin found herself at a loss for words, which only made him look smug for half a second. Infuriating man. The Frostscar restoration hearing took place a month later under clear blue winter skies. This time Tamsin entered the moon's circle with office seals on her shoulders, and no one laughed. The benches were packed again, but the feeling in the air had changed. Less appetite for blood, more hunger for justice. Sarai testified as healer, and was reinstated before the full assembly. Paran stood straight in a dark Frostscar coat, no brand on him, and told the circle exactly what the pen smoke had done. Master Essel, glorious and shaky, read inventory discrepancies until 3 younger clerks cried quietly from sheer procedural awe. Then Tamsin presented the final report. Frostscar's old findings were overturned. Border rights restored. The North Pass returned to pack oversight with independent resin inspection under the Office of Temper and Witness. When the presiding council asked who would stand as Frostscar's legal alpha under the restored charter, the answer was obvious before it was spoken. Rydian Voss stepped into the center ring. This time no restraints waited. No one in the circle breathed quite normally. The presiding elder said, "Do you accept restoration?" Rydian's gaze shifted once, to Tamsin at the witness table. Only once. Then he said, "I accept duty. Very Frostscar. Very him." The elder nodded. Then by public finding and pack witness, Frostscar stands restored. The sound that followed rolled, like weather through the amphitheater. Not wild cheering. Wolves were often too proud for that. But feet struck stone. Hands hit rails. Voices rose. Frostscar, held together through disgrace and winter, was finally seen. Tamsin felt tears sting, and did not bother hiding them. At the edge of the dais, Mallow leaped lightly onto the alpha stone, and sat on it before Rydian could. For half a heartbeat, the entire assembly froze. Then Rydian looked down at the snow leopard, and to the horror of the more formal delegates, he bent and scratched under her chin. The moon circle lost what remained of its dignity. Laughter rippled everywhere, warm and helpless and human. Tamsin covered her mouth. Rydian straightened, one hand still resting briefly on Mallow's neck, and for the first time since she had met him, he smiled where everyone could see. Not a court smile. Not polished. A real one. It ruined her thoroughly. That evening, after the delegates dispersed and the city below turned gold with lamps, Tamsin found him on the upper terrace overlooking the valley. Snow lay in the ledges beyond. Wind moved through the prayer chords. From below came faint music and the distant roar of celebration from packs long denied good reason for it. Rydian stood with his hands on the stone rail, black coat stirring around his legs. Mallow was already there, naturally, sprawled like a pale rug across the sun-warmed portion of the terrace, and chewing the end of her own tail. "You always find the high places," Tamsin said. "It's easier to hear truth when no one is talking." She came to stand beside him. For a while they watched the lights in silence. Then Rydian turned to her fully. He was powerful in a room. On a battlefield, she imagined, terrifying. Here beneath the open dark, he looked something else too. A man who had lost nearly everything, and still chosen not to rot from it. "I said I wanted to ask properly," he said. Tamsin's heart quickened in that now familiar, unreasonable way. Rydian did not kneel. He was too wolf for gestures that performed humility without meaning it. Instead he did something far older. He offered her his wrist. Among wolves, Tamsin knew, that was not submission. It was trust. The place where Pulse lived. The place predators protected from strangers. His voice went low. "I want you in Frostscar because my pack already sees you. I want you in my life because I see you. Not as witness. Not as savior. Not because my wolf decided before I could speak, though he did. I want the woman who walked into a hall full of cowards and made them answer to themselves. Tamsin's throat tightened. Rydian's eyes held hers, silver catching moonlight. You are not an adornment to my restoration. You are not a reward for survival. If you come to me, it will be because you choose me with all your sharp judgment intact. He paused. I won't ask you to shrink. That did it. All the old humiliations, the lowered expectations, the years of doing indispensable work from the edges of rooms where men like Oren assumed brighter women would take the credit for it. They fell away under one simple, impossible promise. I won't ask you to shrink. Tamsin put her fingers around his offered wrist and felt the heavy beat beneath skin. I'm not leaving my office, she said, because she could not resist at least one practical condition. His mouth moved. Good. It would make visits inconvenient. And Mallow goes where I go. Rydian glanced at the leopard. Mallow, sensing discussion, lifted her head and sneezed into the wind. She terrifies my sentries, he said. They'll survive. I know. He looked back at Tamsin. Is that yes? She stepped closer until only breath remained between them. That is yes. The kiss this time was deeper, warmer, earned by fire and ledgers and fury and chosen trust. His hand settled at her waist with controlled strength. Hers slid up beneath his coat. The world narrowed to winter air, wolf heat, and the astonishing fact that this man who could dominate any room kissed her like choice was the most serious thing he had ever known. Mallow rose, stretched luxuriously, and then inserted herself against both their legs with the solemn persistence of a creature, ensuring no vow proceeded without feline oversight. Rydian broke the kiss just long enough to mutter, unbelievable. Tamsin laughed into his shoulder. Below them, Highfall celebrated the end of one order and the beginning of another. In the months that followed, the office of Temper and Witness became exactly the nuisance Tamsin intended. Public classifications now required independent review, proper venting, and non-court witness oversight. The hollow pens emptied of the falsely condemned. Resin routes were audited in open record. Frostscar resumed guardianship of the North Pass with Sarai as chief healer and Paran apprenticed under her. Oren Dast was never trusted with legal ink again. Lizette found that borrowed authority vanished quickly when stripped of family protection and other people's work. Master Essel retired loudly, and then returned twice a week to criticize filing methods with grandfatherly joy. And when Tamsin crossed the moon circle now, people moved not because she wore rank, but because they knew exactly how dangerous a woman with facts, courage, and a white snow leopard could be. As for Rydian Voss, he remained what he had always been. Powerful, watchful, dangerous in the way a winter river is dangerous. The difference was that he no longer stood alone in his own life. Some evenings he came down from Frostscar to Highfall and waited in Tamsin's office while she finished testimony notes. Mallow usually lay across his boots, as if keeping him from wandering off. Other nights Tamsin rode north and found him on the ridge path before the hold, all dark coat and silver eyes, looking at her like he had known long before she did exactly where she belonged. Not beneath him. Beside him. The city never tired of the sight of them. The restored Alpha and the Records woman. The wolf who frightened magistrates and the woman who had made him breathe. And always, padding a little ahead or sitting directly where decorum least preferred, the pale snow leopard with her long fluffy tail in her mouth, guarding the woman everyone had once underestimated until the whole valley learned better. If you like this story, subscribe please.